Welcome everyone back. Hope everyone had a good meal. And thanks again for coming. I want to have a special welcome for those cousins who are joining online. Our President Doug Brubaker, President of Brubaker Families of America Board. He was kind enough to fill in today for the AV technician position. So Doug is working hard to make sure that the folks online can join us who can't be here in person. We're thankful to be able to have that technology available, at least for the time being, as long as it lasts. So thanks, Doug, for doing that, and thanks to everyone who's joining us online, and all of those of you who can be here in person. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ken Brubaker, who is going to share a little bit about the upcoming Brubaker family's trip to the homeland in Switzerland this fall. So, Dr. Ken.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Okay. My voice fades out sometimes, so if it does fade out, get your hand up, okay? And I promise I won't speak too long because I can get lengthy once in a while. So it's really a pleasure to be here. I wish I'd had more time to meet people I haven't met before, but anyhow, welcome. So I just want to give you an update. Lois Ann Mass is leading our Heritage Tour. She led the one back in 2018, which I attended, and it was a great experience. So she would love to be here, but disappointed that she had a conflict with the family. How many of you are 2 or 3 or 4 generation families trying to set up a meeting that suits everybody and all the generations is almost impossible? That's what she fell into. So she had the family, and I said, I think that comes first. So I just want to give you an update. There's a lot of support and a lot of interest and enthusiasm in the next tour coming up. She already has the bus to her school, and there are about 6 or 8 people that are also considering seriously about joining it. So I want to just let you know that this is going to happen. It's going to be a year from now. Actually, it'll be 13 months from now. And I think it'll be a great tour. I was on the tour before, and I know Jim Brubaker sitting next to my wife, Pam, with Marty and Pam, is thinking about going back. And I think now that I made it public, he will maybe go further. But he was there on the trip too. But you can never stop learning. It's a beautiful place. And I just want to emphasize that what Lois Ann has done is a very nice way of trying to incorporate the genealogy, the history of the Brubaker family. We're going to be spending time where the deed was noted back in 1300 for Brubacher over in Zolikon, which is just south of Zurich. Then we'll be going to Herzl, which is where our Peter, that most of us are related to, has also had farmland there, which he had was taken away from him because of his being involved in the Anabaptist movement. So it's a really great opportunity to reunite maybe or ignite our flame in terms of our forefathers that really lived a very difficult time in their life as they got involved in the Anabaptist movement. So it'll be educational, but also be lots of fun too. I don't know if any of you have been to the Schilthorn, but we'll be taking a cable up to halfway to Schilthorn and stay at Muren, which is halfway up to the top of the mountain of Schilthorn. And then in the morning, we'll be going up another cable to the top where we have a revolving restaurant. So pray for good weather. Sometimes it's really cloudy and snowy and rainy up at the top there, but if it is good weather, it's just absolutely beautiful. We'll be also having a trip down the Rhine too. So we're going to be having some fun things and also opportunities to learn. And I can tell you there's lots and lots of things about I'm learning about the Brubaker families. It's interesting that we've now had a contact with Theo and Rose Marie Brubaker, our Brubaker Hefner. Theo is a Brubaker through his mother's side. Anyhow, it's exciting to see that there's a lot of interest among the Brubakers in Europe, particularly in Germany and Switzerland. And we've not had a lot of strong contacts except for one person who unfortunately passed away. Many of you know Christian Brubacher recently. So we're getting connected now to other people. And Theo and Rosemary, when we met them up at Canada last year, are very enthusiastic about trying to connect with the Brubakers in this country. And I really think, I'm pretty sure, we don't have the data yet, and we want to make sure we've got accurate data, but I am almost positive that Theo is part of our French shop because he grew up in the Platinum area. And his genealogy takes him back, the Brubakers back to as far as I think it's 1780 or something like that. So anyhow, it's exciting to be connected with him too. So one of the things we're probably going to be doing near the end of our tour is meeting with some of our German cousins and Swiss cousins at a party together. So it'll be kind of a special celebration. And I know Theo, if he has his brothers, he probably would like to have a Brubaker reunion in Europe, or we could be invited someday. So stay tuned. I think Theo and Rosemary are probably on a Zoom. So good to see you, Rosemary and Theo, and blessings. But if you have any questions, let me know. I put a brochure at each table for you to look at, and the instructions are to how to register if you're interested. There's also copies back if you look at the website, they have where the photographs are. There's copies there if you'd like to take one with you. The information is on the website as well. Just want to encourage you, if you're really interested, I really would encourage you to make decisions sooner or later, because it looks like they're going to, well, in Los Angeles perspective, when she looks at her past experiences, she said, well, the bus is 2/3 full, but past experience would say that they're going to easily fill the bus up. And I think they're probably right about that. So if you think about it, it's a great opportunity. And I told Jim here, he said he's thinking about it, as I mentioned earlier. I've been on it before, so it's okay if you've been on it before. You want to go on again, it'd be a great opportunity to connect with people across the country, as well as meet some maybe German cousins you've never met before. So anyhow, if you have any questions afterwards, please contact me or contact Lois. And on the brochure here, it does have her email. It's also on the website as well. So she's not hard to get a hold of, but if you need to, please feel free to let me know. I'll be able to help you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Hopefully, some of you can find some time next year to go over and do that trip. So, okay. One of the things I didn't want to forget was we do have some expenses that are involved in this event, and we traditionally just pass the hat around and ask for anyone who feels so moved to make a donation to our expenses here. We do have a room fee that we pay for here at Homestead Village. They're very gracious in their being able to use this facility. It's a wonderful facility, but we do have some expenses. So if we can offset some of those expenses, that would be great. So we're gonna just maybe pass. Yeah, we'll just get I think there's 1 or 2 baskets here that we have. We'll just get them going around the room, and again, no pressure. Just if you feel that you can help out, that'd be great. So at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Darvin Martin. He is from Brownstown, Pennsylvania, so he's a local resident. He works for the Sotex Corporation, which is a Swiss company, and they do pharmaceutical instrumentation. He is a chemist with his background, but his specialty is studying DNA as it's connected to family history. So he is our resident expert in helping us understand a little bit more, and maybe a lot more, hopefully, but understanding more about our history and the background of our family and where the Brubakers came from. And he'll be giving us some great insight into that, I'm sure. So without further ado, Darvin Martin, thanks for coming.
Okay, thank you, Roger. We'll see if that goes far enough. That you have my presentation on there. Hey, first of all, I want to vouch for the tour next year. I've been over to Switzerland many times, and if you go, it's going to be a really special thing, and you're going to want to go again if you go. I think almost everybody that's been over on a heritage tour to Switzerland wants to go back again. So it's really a special place to see Lake Zurich, the city of Zurich, study the Anabaptist history, and go to the farmsteads of our ancestors. And we have some very, very specific, Martin has found, he tells a story about the very localized farmstead there. They're just outside of Zurich, right? So we have some very specific Brubaker homesteads that are going to be included on that tour, from what I understand, right? So I when Doug had asked me to present, I looked back through my notes, and it was 6 years ago that I talked about DNA here. It was during that the 300th anniversary of the immigrant Brubakers coming in 1717. So in 2017, we had a presentation that I was part of, and we also had a tour. How many of you were on that tour? We visited the Brubaker homesteads locally, and I think there was a tour into Lancaster City and a bunch of different things that were going on that same weekend, Friday and Saturday and such. So since that time, I titled this just some recent ramblings on Brubaker DNA, because there's some updates, right? We have 6 years. There's all kinds of new scientific studies going on. More people have been tested. Higher resolution tests have happened. And so we have new information that simply adds to the information that we had before, but it's interesting information. So I'm gonna present some of that a bit later in the presentation. But I also want to show you that I found some interesting things about my connections to Brubakers in the last 6 years that I didn't even know the last presentation. So I found out that, yes, I'm not just descended through one Brubaker, like I thought in 2017. I'm descended through two Brubakers. I'm actually descended through both the A line and the B line. And so I'm more of a Brubaker than I ever knew before. And it's kind of funny because you would think, I've spent all my life studying genealogy, right? And to find new family connections, I'm finding them all the time, right? But you go back far enough and you have hundreds, even thousands of ancestors. So I'm going to, at the very beginning of this presentation, show you the two different ways that I'm connected. And then we can talk about the DNA findings after that. So, and I'm using a DNA chart here to show you how I'm connected. So my first Brubaker lineage goes back to a lady who died in 1837. So it's pretty far back. It's in the 9th generation back, and it's back this line. So when I show you this, I'm looking at my father's line over here, my mother's line over here. So it's back my mother's line, mother's mother, father. That's actually the Bradley family. That was John Bradley, my great-great-grandfather. His father was John Bradley as well. Dates are up there. That John Bradley's mother was Esther Shelley, and her mother was Barbara Brandt. Those Brandts come from Ratho Township, and that's where my Brubakers came from the A family. So here's how that lineage actually goes. Samuel Brandt and Anna Brubaker, I have the dates there. They're buried at this little obscure cemetery up in Ratho Township that I've never even been to, but somebody was there and photographed, and I'm going to show you those photographs now. And her father was Peter Brubaker, who's buried at Mastersonville Brethren in Christ Church up between Manheim and Elizabethtown. Anybody come through this family, or am I the only one? Okay, so we have a few that come through this family. And of course, then Peter Brubaker's father is Hans Brubaker, the A1 family, whose homestead is a short walk from this place, right? Just down there, I believe, right? So this is my first connection. This is the connection that I knew about in 2017 when I was here before. These are the gravestones of that Anna Brubaker Brandt on the right side there, and her husband here, Samuel Brandt, found in that cemetery. You can still read these. Of course, they were like buried or covered over, so they didn't deteriorate so bad. But you can see they're in German. Here lies Anna Brandt. I'm just translating here. The wife of Samuel Brandt. She died 7th of June, 1837, and then you can't quite make out the age there, but you see the word month there in German. This is her husband's grave here, Samuel Brandt. Are you able to read this? Samuel Brandt right here. You see a date here, 1745, right? Can you make that out? Okay, so I was trying to zoom in on this tombstone well enough that it can show up here. You see, this is the death date here, 18th of January. Can you make that out? 18th of January, 1819. Now, when you do this kind of research, you tend to rely on the dates on these tombstones, but there's an issue here. The age, as mentioned on this tombstone, 66 years and 3 months, right? 66 years, 3 months. If I take 1819, subtract out 1745, I don't get 66 years. So what's wrong? I don't know. But sometimes this happens on tombstones. You think tombstones are primary sources, but it looks like somebody made a mistake, right? Really, because that is certainly 1745. That is certainly 66 years. That is certainly 1819. But yet that doesn't add up. This should be, if this is correct, this should be 1752. And if this is correct, then that should be 73 years. So I don't know what to make of that. But that's certainly the original tombstone, right? So somebody made a mistake there at one point. But that's what the cemetery looks like. That's what that cemetery looks like. That's where those stones come from, right? So this is how some of our cemeteries are these days. An old farm cemetery that the Brandt family on the what was the Brandt family farm. This is where that farm's located. If you know your local geography a bit, Mannheim is right off the map over on this side. This is heading up towards, this is Valley Road. My Bradley ancestor, a generation or two down from here, lived on this farm right here, not far from here. This is Valley Road. This is Hostler Road here. Just heading from Mannheim up towards Elizabethtown is where we're talking about here for that. Okay, that's my A family. Now, if I go back to the next generation, that Peter that's buried at Mastersonville rather than Christ, this is his tombstone. And it's really nice. In fact, I put 2 pictures in here of it because it just looks so good. I mean, for 1811, you hardly ever find a tombstone that's that detailed, that's that legible in this time frame. You know, 1811 or even back into the late 1700s. But you can read this whole thing. Peter Brubaker, born the 15th of September, 1725, died the 15th of July, 1811, gives his age, 85 years. Maybe you can't quite make out what's down here, but that's really special to have a tombstone that's that legible at that time. This is all on Find a Grave, by the way. Those tombstones and such are all on Find a Grave. And this is the description of Peter Brubaker that's shown on Find a Grave. This is from his house that's up in that area in Western Ratho Township. This looks like it's actually PBB 1781. And that's the transcription of his tombstone and such. All of that is accessible on the web now with Find a Grave. And this here, I took off your website because this is the different immigrant families of the Brubakers, showing how every family has its own label. The A family would be, this is Peter's father, Hans, from the A family. The B family, some people are related to here as well. That would be Hans's cousin. And then all these other families here. And I come through both those families now. Who recognizes this house? Okay, this is Hans's house just down the road here, right? This is actually the front of the house, right? But the front of the house is on the south side. Am I right about that? This is the front of the house, I think, right? Yeah, so this is the 1717 immigrant. And then if I go through my B line of Brubakers, that's also on my grandmother's side. Here on my grandmother, right here. And if I go up this way, my grandfather, no, my mom, my grandfather's mother and mother, that goes back to Landis's for a few generations, then back to Rohr. And these are at Mellinger's Church, just on the east side of Lancaster. Christian Rohr, married to Mary Brubaker. Those are her dates. They're buried at Mellinger's. Her father is Jacob Brubaker, and his father is Hans Jacob Brubaker, the Beeline family. This is the one that I didn't know in 2017. These Landises were a little obscure, and eventually I figured out how they connected to the Royers and then to the Brubakers and such. And we have a tombstone here as well. This is found in Mellinger's Church, and you can read this one too. This is from 1827. So we have here Maria Royer, born. What does that say? Brubacher. Born as a Brubacher. The IN at the end is just the feminine form here. So geboren Brubachen. And then this gives her date of death, 29 October 1827, and then her age at death, 72 years and such. So a slate tombstone that's still able to be read. Her husband died after her, and his tombstone's not there. So I don't know what to make of that either. Maybe his tombstone deteriorated over time, but her tombstone's there. And this is the Jacob Brubacher farmstead, the B family over on Farmingdale Road. During the tour 6 years ago, during that tour, we stopped at this place too. I don't think we went inside, if I remember right. We kind of walked around the back side of the house here. And yeah, a special place as well. So I want to also mention here that my wife also has a Brubaker. She's not here today. So my daughter has 3 lines. It's what that would mean, right? So if I would take this same chart here, and by the way, I say here brother and sister down here at the bottom of the chart because your brothers and your sisters have exactly the same ancestors that you do, right? So when we look at DNA, we want to compare, families together. Siblings all have exactly the same ancestors, right? So that's why I include this here. If you go this line, it's your paternal ancestors. We call that the Y DNA. I'm going to talk about that a lot today. We go this side, it's the maternal ancestors. That's called the mitochondrial DNA. And all these lines in here, we call autosomal DNA. We can look at all that DNA and we can make matches and predictions about how people are related and all that kind of thing. So when I look at this chart here, I'm just showing you how, in this case, my wife, Gina, how she ends up connecting to a Brubaker line. And it's not through any of these lines on the sides, but instead it goes through the autosomal as well here. So if we go from her this way to her grandfather's mother, to be Warren Crispin, Mary Bowman, and then her Mary Bowman's mother, and then this is this Maria Schleicher. And then if we go back further, Maria Schleicher's mother was Elizabeth Brubaker, who died in 1888, buried at Salem United Brethren Cemetery in Franklin County. So my wife's family is all from Franklin County, but so this is the Franklin County line. Her father is Isaac Brubaker. This is the L family. They're the L1 family. That's in the previous list. And then it's a little obscure. We're not sure exactly. There are the Brubakers in Franklin County. We're not sure. Some people say his father was Emmanuel Brubaker, but it looks like Emmanuel is probably the brother, just the way the dates work out and such. So we're not sure, but this Isaac connects somehow back to this H1 family, this Peter Brubacher family, who set up this farm in Antrim Township, Franklin County, where it's close by where my wife's family all comes from. So we suspect that we don't quite have this, maybe not correct. That's why I have the question mark there. But we certainly know that this Isaac Brubaker is a grandson or some kind of connection to this Peter Brubaker here in Franklin County. And that's the H family on your list. So I come through the A and B families, and my wife comes through the H families. Anybody here come through the H family as well? No, okay. Okay, they're mostly just a Franklin County family. If you go to Richard Warren Davis's list, who's done a lot of work on Mennonite immigrants and such, Anabaptists from Switzerland coming over to Pennsylvania, he talks about this H family, and this is what he says about it. This Maria Brubaker is apparently Peter on the last slide's mother, born in Ebersheim, died in probably Cacao Township, married to Abram Hackman. Now you see here, there's a record here. She was probably the Brubaker girl who had a child out of wedlock in Ebersheim about January 1743. On January 9th, 1743, the Reform minister at Ike wrote the Mennonites at Ebersheim and asked them to bring her child to be baptized there. They refused. The child was probably Peter Brubaker, who was called a stepson of Abraham Hackman in Hackman's will. She and her husband, Abraham Hackman, sold their farm to Rudolph Boyer and arrived in Philadelphia in 1754 on the ship Brothers with a group of Mennonites, which included her brother, Abraham Brubaker, who returned from Pennsylvania to bring her and relatives to Pennsylvania. So what this is telling me is that if we test, now think about this, if we test the Y-DNA of a Brubaker descendant of Peter's in Franklin County, would that match the rest of our Brubakers? Probably not. Why not? Because this son, Peter, took on the mother's name because she wasn't married. You see that? We don't know who the father is. We just don't know at this point. So that'll be interesting to test at some point. If we find some Brubakers that want to test their Y-DNA and see if they match. Because if we go back to that description, let me go back to that description again here. This line here would follow the surnames, right? If you have a male with the Brubaker name here that's a descendant of that Peter from Antrim Township, Franklin County, the ancestor would still be a male up here, but that Brubaker name comes through the woman's line. You see that? So there's some other lineage there that we're not sure of in that case. So maybe sometime we'll get that resolved. Now, you notice on those last lists, whether it's the A family, the B family, or the H family, I'm sure many of the others we could add in here as well, they all go back to this town called Ebersheim in Germany. This is what that town looks like from the air. This is just the Google Maps view of the town. Small farming community, looks kind of like Terry Hill, where I grew up, right? I mean, farms all around it, right? And look in the center of the town, what is this? The Mennonite Church in Ebersheim, in the center of the town. Isn't that something? and here's a picture of the Mennonite Church right here in Ebersheim, right? So this was a Mennonite community that came out of Switzerland, persecuted in Switzerland for being Anabaptist, and then came to the Palatinate area of Germany, where they were allowed to settle, and they were allowed to hold meetings and eventually construct their own church and such. And you can go over there today. I don't know if that's going to be included on the tour. next fall. It will be included on the tour. Awesome. So, yeah. So you can go over here and you can see this church and maybe go inside this church and such during that tour. Mennonite church since the early 1700s for sure. If we take the family back further, we go into Switzerland, and it's this community called Wädenswil on the south side of Lake Zurich, where the Brubakers are from. And then there's a particular farming community up in the hills above Wädenswil, or actually it's across the lake, right, Martin? On the north side of the lake.
The north side of the lake is where the main safe things fall. And then the story is that they were more tolerant, the Anabaptists were more secure on the south side of the lake.
Right.
I think it was 1652 or something like that, when there was a baptism in Wädenswil. And
Yeah,
you're right, they moved into the hill towns. And but the original Brubakers were from the upper side.
Yes, yeah, I can expand on that a little bit in the sense of just looking at some general Anabaptist history. So our version of Anabaptism starts in 1525 in Zurich among the students of Ulrich Zwingli, and as they are persecuted, the adherers of Anabaptism flee to the more rural areas. So the persecution starts in the city in Zurich, and then they flee. And so moving to that description, right? So they're going to a more rural area where they're not going to face persecution in the same way, at least not initially face persecution in the same way. Eventually it does catch up there as well, and they leave for Germany. But the other areas, Herzl is a name that we talk about too with the Brubakers. That's on this side of Lake Zurich as well, on the west side of Lake Zurich, and also a rural area. The Landises are from Herzl. There's other Lancaster County Mennonite families that all come from that area, and they lived in that area because it was a rural area to avoid persecution, and eventually they had to move out. In some cases, they were expelled from Switzerland for being Anabaptist, and in some cases, they realized that there was really no future in Switzerland for them, and would eventually be expelled. So they moved out into Germany and then eventually over to Pennsylvania. So this is this is just showing you a map of going from Wädenswil in Switzerland down here to Ebersheim up here in Germany. So that's about 400 kilometers, 260 miles or so. That is, I just wanted to give you the perspective of what that kind of trip would have been to go from Wädenswil over to Ebersheim. And that trip happened, for the Brubakers, happened in the late 1600s, 1670s, 1680s. I didn't put an exact date here. I don't have that in my head, but in that time frame is when they moved out of Switzerland to
1630s, 40s.
1640s. Okay, 1640s.
They were in the area around Strasbourg, which is now in France.
Right here, Strasbourg, right? So
For a while, there's some neat little villages where they were, there's records of it. And then they moved up to the Palatine later on.
Mhm.
Peter Brubaker, the ones that was persecuted the most.
Mhm. So this trip happened in a few stages.
Stage.
Yes. Yeah, and
They were in Ebersheim by 1662.
okay, good. Yeah. So this is fairly typical of Mennonite families coming from Switzerland, that they move to this area of Germany for 2 or 3 generations and then come over to Lancaster County. So we're talking about leaving Switzerland in the 1640s, moving to Ebersheim in the 1660s, staying there until 1717, and then coming to Pennsylvania. So there's a few generations that had their home here, their origins in Switzerland, had their home here, and then move over to Pennsylvania.
And some of the descendants went to other towns in the Palatine, not just the Ebersheim.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, and other Mennonite families as well. Like Ebersheim was a really strong Mennonite area, but there were other areas around and other places in Germany as well, and even in the Alsace, in this part of what's now France, there were a lot of Mennonite families that lived as well. before they came over to Lancaster County. So before I get to this chart, this is the big thing about DNA that I want to talk about. But I want to go back to this one again, just so that you understand what we're looking at here. 3 different types of DNA. I'm going to focus on this one, this Y DNA, because for genealogy, this is the one that becomes, I don't know, the most special, or it's the one that we can tie to the surname, because in our Western cultures, the surnames all come through the males, right? So when you look at the Brubacher name, you get that name from a male in your family. Like for me, I don't have Brubacher as my surname, but if I go back, eventually there's a lady in my ancestry that has the name Brubacher, and then she gets it from her father, right? And then it goes back from there. So at some point, if you don't have the Brubaker surname, at some point you're connecting to someone in your family that has a Brubaker family surname, like this one here. But I'm going to focus on this Y DNA here, because that showcases a certain type of signature that's associated with the Brubaker family. So those who are male that test, that have the surname Brubaker, they have a certain DNA type. And then we can look at other people. Let's say the surname spelled a little bit differently. You know, some places have Brubacher, like B-R-E-W Bacher. Well, are they the same family or not? Back in time, they have a common connection. Maybe it's much further back than this 5 generations here. Maybe it's 10 generations or 15 generations or 20 generations back. But someplace they'll have a common connection. And if they do have that signature that's the same, we know that they're related. We're not going to know exactly which generation per se, but we're going to know that they're related. So this is really helpful for families, right? So we have the surname Zimmerman around here, and we have people with the surname Carpenter. So it so happens that a Zimmerman in German is a Carpenter in English. And we have found that some Zimmermans have the same DNA signature as some Carpenters. So we know then that some of these ancestors anglicized their name from Zimmerman to Carpenter. And then there are other ones that don't have the same signature, right? So we can differentiate which families are related this way, because a Zimmerman, a person who builds with wood, is a vocation. So you would expect many people, as they adopted this surname, maybe back in the 1300s or 1400s, wouldn't necessarily be related to each other. They had the same vocation, and it ended up being, okay, Hans Zimmerman, right? So there are many different DNA signatures that connect to that Zimmerman surname. It so happens that some of those signatures also match some signatures with the Carpenter surname. So in that case, we can figure out which of these families is connected, even if they don't have the surname the same. And it's true to some extent with the Brubakers as well, because back in Switzerland, it was Brubacher, right? Spelled with the P sometimes, or there's different ways that it was spelled, and some of the ways seem a bit strange and unusual. And we could test and then find out that these families are the same. Or we could test and find out that there are several families that have the Brubaker surname that don't match the same DNA. So they're actually separate families. They go back to separate families. Maybe 2 people lived in this area where there's the bridge over the brook, and they weren't necessarily related, but they both adopted the surname of that area after they moved from there, right? That's usually how it's done, right? If a surname comes from an area, if you're the person that lives by the bridge at the brook and your name is Hans, you don't call yourself that until you move away, because you're going to move to another town and there's going to be somebody beside you whose name's Hans as well. And no, I'm the Hans that lived at the bridge by the brook, and you're the Hans that lived wherever else, right? The surnames that come from a location usually are adopted after you leave that location. right? So now there might have been more than one, right? You don't know that for sure. And I guess we haven't tested enough to know that for sure. But we have found some interesting things. And I'm going to show you some of that. And some of that has come up more recently as well. So let's go back to where I left off on these slides here. Right here, if we expand back from Ebersheim into Wattensville, we have our 1717 immigrants here. We go back to this Peter in Wattensville that we talked about that moved up to Ebersheim. If we go back another 2 generations or so, we have this Hans Brubaker, this baker from Zumikon. He's listed as an Anabaptist preacher in 1525, so right at the beginning of the Anabaptist movement. Now, do we know for sure that he's the ancestor, or is it somebody else in the family? We don't know that for sure, but we have a record of this Hans Brubaker being an Anabaptist, being a baker. So I have him in there. Now, we've tested a bunch of Brubakers with their Y-DNA, and they match other people. So I have here next tier of Y-DNA matches. It's these people here. Now, this becomes really interesting because if you look at these matches, you can get a sense as to going back in time, who else is related to this Brubaker family on the paternal line. I'm only talking about the paternal line back through time. So if we go back to the beginnings of the Brubaker surname, and we go back beyond that, we got to stretch our brains a little bit beyond that, beyond the time when Brubakers had their surname, beyond maybe about the year 1300 or someplace around there when surnames became typical in Switzerland. If we go beyond that, well, we still have this Y-DNA signature that we can look at in our bodies. And if these people match, we can say to what extent they match, and we can say, well, how are these people related on that paternal line? And it so happens that we have these interesting matches. One of the closest one is this Colburn family, this Wilson Colburn, who the tester, his ancestor died in 1914 in England. Now, we know our family is Swiss. We know beyond the shadow of a doubt that our family is Swiss. But here we have a match from England. What does that mean? I would strongly think that this guy's ancestors came from Switzerland. Even though he came from England, obviously, maybe his father, maybe his grandfather, maybe his great-grandfather came from Switzerland. I don't know the history of that. I don't know for sure. But the fact that this guy who tested has this ancestor from England, but this signature matches this one, really strongly indicates that he came from Switzerland. What's the other alternative? That our Brubakers came from England? Well, I don't think so. We have a lot of documentation of that. And in fact, we have, if we look at other lineages here that also relate really closely to Brubakers, we have more evidence of Switzerland connections. So probably this one goes back to Switzerland, even though this person died in 1914 in England. Let's go to the next tier here. Schlebach, an Amish name from Switzerland. Gingrich, an Amish name from Switzerland. Both these are also closely related to our Brubaker signature. And they're both Switzerland. They come from Rotenbach in the Emmental. So not a Zurich name, the way that the Brubakers are, but a Bernese name from the Emmental. So if you want to talk about who is related paternally to the Brubakers, if you go back before the Brubaker name was established, the first place that we find people would be the name Gingrich and the name Schlebach. They go back to the same paternal family. Maybe the year 1300, 1200, something like that. And the fact that these people come from Rotenbach in the Emmental in Bern, it's maybe 30 miles from Wattensville, something like that. It's not far from where these people are. So now we have our connection, right? So now we can begin to put a bigger DNA type genealogy together. We can say that, well, all the Brubakers that match this DNA signature, if you go back beyond that, they combine with this Gingrich and Slayback family here as well. And it so happens that this family here also moved out of Switzerland into Germany and were part of a farm. Both those families were part of a farm not too far from Ebersheim, but the connection is obviously back in Switzerland between these, back in Switzerland hundreds of years ago between the Brubakers and these families. And then if we go further, there are also Swiss families. This Harter family, well, this one is Germany, but probably back to Switzerland because this Harter surname is found in Zurich as well. This name here, this Bienenschelder, his family comes from Mannendorf in Zurich on the north side of Lake Zurich. So kind of right across from where Wattenbiel is at. So that one is a really strong connection, geography-wise and DNA-wise. This name, Brunner, is actually, there's a little town in Lancaster County called Brunnersville. That's where that name comes from. Has a DNA signature very close to the Brubakers as well. Comes from Switzerland. And this name Keller as well comes from Switzerland. So now Keller is a pretty general name. Maybe there's a lot of different DNA signatures for Keller, but there is one that is this ancestor right here, this Hans Caspar Keller, that matches very closely to the Brubakers. So here, the England one is the outlier. You see that? The England one is the outlier. Everything else here is Switzerland, a little bit of Germany here, but everything else here is Switzerland. That shows us that we're on the right track here, that our Brubakers are Swiss, and they connect to these other families here that are also Swiss. Now, how did I come up with this list, right? So there's two ways of looking at this Y-DNA. There's these STR markers that I talk about here, and I say here on here that there's 5 of 111 STR markers different, 5 of 111 different here, 6 different, 6 of 67. This tester was not as high resolution. 6 different, 7 different, 7 different. So I kind of stacked these based on the closest and then getting a little bit more distant back through time a bit. There's also a second way that we can look at comparing this DNA. And that's based on these values right here. This RFCG value, RFTV value. This is a particular change that happens in the DNA that they're looking at. It's called a SNP, and it's where the code in the DNA changes at one position. When that happens, it's with a particular person in history, a male, at a particular time, at a particular location. When the DNA changes like that, it gets nested. And what I mean by that is, if that person has children, that DNA goes down through those children. So we can calculate and categorize with this DNA to find how people are related in their ancestry. So these codes here are nested in a certain way that some codes are earlier than other codes. Let's say, for example, two different males both have this change called A, but one has a change called B, and the second one does not have the change called B, but has a change called C. We know that the change A is older because both those people have A, but not both of them have B and not both of them have C. So they're nested in this kind of way. These codes are the same as those, and they can be nested, and they are nested in a certain way to show how this genealogy would work out. So if we take that code, yep.
Question?
Yep.
What would cause that change? Yeah, what causes the change?
What causes a change? It is a bit of randomness, right? It just happens the way that you flip a coin, and is it going to be heads or tails? When DNA gets transmitted to a child, when a child is conceived, then if a change happens in that person's body, that change gets implemented into that child, onto the descendants. So the change is random, but the change is also determine what our characteristics are physically. So this is why we look different from each other. If you have an identical twin, your DNA is going to be very, very close, 99.999% the same. And you look, that gets expressed physically. So that's why you look the same. But these changes also showcase down through lineages what our differences are. So we were talking earlier today that, oh, you can just look in the face of somebody and say they're a Brubaker, right? There's something about the way that your face is shaped, or the way your voice is, or your expression. These things come down through. You know, I have my height comes from my mom's father. He was 6'4", I'm 6'1", not quite as tall as he was. But my face, my height and body type, I'll say, comes from my mom's father. But my face comes from my dad for sure. And we're all these kind of combinations of our parents in interesting ways, right? You don't look exactly the same as your brothers or sisters, but yet there's enough resemblance that you can tell that your family typically. That's what this is about. These small changes happen in DNA, they get expressed physically, and that showcases our differences. So it's kind of looking at, it's comparing the similarities and differences. Tremendous amount of diversity throughout all of humanity, but yet all kinds of similarity as well. And so this is a way to scientifically look at that and compare families. And so if I follow that signature down here, this is the Schleibach one that I was talking about, because there hasn't been a Brubaker that's tested this exact SNP. But I think because the Schleibach is so close, this is the one that would have the Brubakers in as well. Right here, it's this one. Here's the Schleibach one, this FTB 4092-1. And it's so close to what the signature is for the Brubakers that we have so far that I put the Brubakers in here. I mean, maybe they fit slightly outside of this and go down here or somewhere, but I think they're right here. And if we trace these SNPs back, you can see here that this goes back to this one about 1000 AD, 1,000 years ago in Switzerland. I say Switzerland because all of these families, other than this outlier that I talked about in the slide before, were all Swiss. And then if we go back to the next one, we can also say that this is all Swiss. Now here we're going back pretty far. We're taking a big leap here, because here, if we go back to the next tier up, there's 28 of these SNPs all in a row that define all these families downstream from those. The Brunner and Kellers that we talked about earlier, the Schleibach and Ginrichs that we talked about, but here's another family that shows up then. And one that I think some of us will be familiar with, the Stricklers. They're in there too. And they're a Swiss family from Herzl. And they came over to Lancaster County. They became Anabaptists. They came over from, well, they moved from Switzerland to Germany, came over to Lancaster County. So if you go back this far, we can include the Stricklers in this Brubaker family, right? The surname Brubaker, of course, wasn't used at that point. But we have a whole category of families on the paternal line here that are all connected. Stricklers, Brunner, Keller, Brubaker, Schleibach, Gingrich. This family from England again. Here shows up another English one, and this is a clue. And I remember I talked in 2017 that the Brubaker signature is Celtic. And these English ones that are creeping in here showcase that. And if you study the Celts in England, the people that built Stonehenge, and the people that live in Wales, and people that live in Ireland and in Scotland, their ancestors come from Alpine Europe. It wasn't called Switzerland at the time, but they come from Alpine Europe. The Celts from the British Isles come from Switzerland. And this is showcasing that. Now, I think this one that we mentioned earlier is much more recent. I think he has probably a great-great-grandfather that came from Switzerland or something. But this one down here is showcasing a migration that happened in the ancient past.
So are you suggesting the Brubakers are responsible for Stonehenge?
I'm suggesting, I'm suggesting that the Brubakers had cousins. In Switzerland, when the Brubakers lived in Switzerland back, the Stonehenge was built like 2600 BC.
We go pretty far back.
When the Brubakers were living in Switzerland at that time, they had cousins that moved to England and built Stonehenge. The connections with the Celts are all over the place in these families, and it's so strong that there are some ways that back in that time you can think of Switzerland to the British Isles as one country, because it's one culture. There's a huge amount of trade going on back and forth. It's during the Bronze Age when they started figuring out how to smelt tin and combine it with melted copper to make bronze. And so before that, there was the Copper Age. And once they were able to make bronze, their metal was much harder and strong and durable. So using that for farming, using that for household items, and using that for weapons was a huge advantage. So we have this kind of, you can see this in the DNA. You see these radiations, I guess we could call them, right? I'm not talking about radioactivity or something like that. I'm talking about these families that at times spread out really far in the DNA. And then you have these families that have kind of a long line of a paternal descent that's very specific. When there's a radiation, it means that a culture established a new technology and was able to migrate with that technology and ended up having lots of children. And through that, their DNA gets distributed all over. So we had a really big radiation when Europeans came over to North America, because the Native Americans that lived here weren't as populated. And then as we established this area from Europe, we have this radiation that happened. That happened in the past as well. And that happened during this Bronze Age in Europe. So these people that figured out how to smelt tin and copper together had huge advantages because of that, and that spread that technology onto the British Isles. So this is just a Celtic culture, buildings, village, set up, just a model that's set up in a museum in Germany. But there is something interesting about this that I wanted to show, that there are houses with their hatched roofs and such, but there's what's different about this than what you would see maybe Lancaster City or something like that. There's no streets. Exactly. This is certainly a sign. These Celts did have horses, by the way, but they didn't have horses that they were using for transportation in such a way that we did in the 1700s or 1800s. This is certainly a walking community. You see that? This is organized a lot more like what a Native American village would be here in North America. A walking community of houses all clustered together. A Celtic village. Maybe like our ancestors had 2,000 years ago or more. Here's just some areas in Europe that showcase this Celtic. Hallstatt is in Austria. It's the first place. We don't know what the Celts are called Celts from the Romans. I don't know if they called themselves Celts or not. And we named this earlier pre-Celtic culture Hallstatt because of the area that it was first, archaeologists first uncovered it. But then there are these villages all around that have this. So this is the area of Switzerland here. You can see some of the villages related to Switzerland, but here you have Czech Republic and Moravia and Eastern Germany and Netherlands, Netherlands here, Belgium here. This is all, here's some from Italy, So you can see this expansion of this Celtic culture throughout much of Central Europe, much of the beginning in the Alps, or just east of the Alps. And we can take these branches back through even further. I categorize these with green where our Brubakers are. So this gets further and further. So I want to say it's a little hard for us to comprehend just from the human element because we can certainly understand decades and maybe human lifespan 80 years, 90 years, maybe 100. So we can maybe understand a century, 2 centuries, 3 centuries back. I had, at church, we had Chester Wanger, who was part of my church, who died at 102 years old. And there was one time while he was still living, I gave a presentation to the kids and I said, let's think about, instead of thinking about years, let's think about Chesters. I said, okay, 3 Chesters ago is when our country was founded, and the immigrants came over, the Mennonite immigrants came over 3 Chesters ago, and then 12 Chesters ago was when St. Francis of Assisi was around, and then 20 Chesters ago is when Jesus was, and such. So you kind of try to find ways to model how to understand bigger time scales. So if we get beyond centuries, it's hard, right? If you talk about a millennia, it is really hard for us to understand what a millennia is, right? So I'm going back in time here, even a few millennia here. This is actually 4 millennia ago here, talking about Bronze Age of Europe. But I can trace these nested DNA signatures back this way. So this would be where the Brubakers and all those other families are in this category right here. The Stricklers and the Bruners and the Schleybachs and the Gingrichs are all here. And then we move back to this one, and then we move back to this one, and then we're incorporating all these other families. And then back to this one, and then back to this one, all through Bronze Age Europe here, back 4,000 years into all of this. And you can see here that we begin to see more of this Celtic influence coming in, because if we take these side branches, this one's found in the British Isles and Ireland, Czech Republic, Sicily. What was that map that we had earlier? All Celtic peoples here, British Isles and Ireland. Here, this DNA sample, an ancient DNA sample found from Hungary. That's something new, by the way, since 2017. Now, the testing of DNA is getting so good that they're being able to take samples of graves from archaeology. And if the graves are preserved well enough, if the bones are still there, they can take the DNA from the bones and extract it and compare it to people alive today. And that's exactly what we have here. So this DNA sample from Hungary, which is assigned to a Celtic culture that lived in Hungary, matches fairly closely to everything that we're talking about here with the Brubakers and these other things that we're talking about. So we can have these connections in history this way as well. This clad here found Germany, Ireland, France, and Britain. Ireland, Britain, Celtic. There's areas of France that are also Celtic. Ireland and Romania. So maybe somebody migrated further east, right? So to bring about that, right? So this is all Celtic Bronze Age Europe, and that's where the Brubaker signature is as well. Now, I will say, because that's all Alpine Europe, most Swiss families, between 50 and 60% of Swiss families have a certain type of Celtic signature. The Brubakers are simply one subgroup of that. But that's a very common, if I would have to guess, like if Brubakers didn't test, and I would have to guess, well, what is the signature? I would say it's some type of Celtic signature. I wouldn't know the specifics of all this for sure, but it'd be some type of Celtic signature. My Martins are not that, even though my Martins are Swiss. Their signature is a Proto-Germanic signature, which means that when the Roman Empire in the West began to fall, in the 400s, these German tribes came in and caused that fall. Probably my ancestors were part of that. My Martin ancestors were part of that. Whereas your Brubaker ancestors were the Celts living in eastern Switzerland at that time when that happened, when the Germans came into the western part of Switzerland and such. So it's interesting to see these dynamics at place here. Bronze Age Europe among the Celts. This is that ancient DNA connection that I was talking about. This just comes from the FTDNA website that's related to the matches. And they're incorporating this ancient DNA into our analysis these days. If we go back before that, I'm almost running out of time, right? I'm not going to take a lot more time, but if we go back before that Celtic culture, it's this culture that has pottery like this called the Brubaker culture in Alpine Europe. So they have pottery like this. They had, instead of those more individual type houses, they had houses like this back then, 4,000 years ago and such. This looks more like the Native American longhouse down at the Hunter House, right? I mean, there's some similarities, right? This would be like an extended family that lived under one roof. Okay, so you can see some of those similarities there as you go through. This is how that Brubaker culture spread through Europe. A lot of it starting here in Central Europe, Alpine Europe, going to the British Isles, like we talked about. This area down here. Also, this is right before the Celts. So this has strong Celtic areas along the coast here. Sardinia, Sicily. Do you know your European geography? You know what this island is right here? This down below Sicily, this island right here. Malta, yeah, Malta. Let me show you something. If I go back to this earlier radiation, so before the Bronze Age, this Brubaker culture radiation. So this signature here is spreading all over Europe, different places. What do we have here? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different clads down underneath this. This is the one that the Brubakers eventually fall into. But these other ones, where are they found? Germany, Switzerland, France, Italy, British Isles, Denmark, Belgium, and Malta. Here, Malta again. Isn't this interesting? Like these different clads that come down through here, they're all spread over different parts of Europe. Some of them end up having some Swiss connections. This one has a Swiss connection different than our Brubaker one. Our Brubaker one is here. There are certain Swiss families that fall into this branch. There are certain Swiss families that fall into this branch. There are apparently no Swiss families that fall into this one. This one apparently is just from Scotland. So some of these end up being just very specific lines, not a radiation, but instead a very specific line that stays in one place, that didn't necessarily have new technology and didn't move out to other areas. Some of these end up being Swiss. This one ends up having a Swiss connection, but also Serbia, Hungary, Czech Republic. This one's only Germany. This one's only found in Spain and France. So you can get a sense when you compare this DNA, you can get a sense as to what culture these signatures match to based on their distribution. So Brubaker DNA goes back to Celtic culture of Alpine Europe. Their cousins built Stonehenge. And then if you go back beyond that, you're in this Brubaker culture of Alpine Europe. And here's some ancient DNA connections that relate to that as well. This guy's from Siena in Tuscany in Italy, part of this Brubaker culture. And here's another one. Actually, this one's from Czech Republic. There were like almost a dozen of these, so I didn't put them all on here, but just a few examples of ancient DNA from archaeology in Europe that matches that matches your signature. This all matches to that Z36 signature that's way back there in your ancestry. It all matches to that. And this is how I'll close, because this map, and this is all just Y-DNA, but it shows the diversity of Y-DNA with migrations all throughout the world and these different signatures. So in Europe here, this line is R1b. And if we go back those signatures, we get to this line that comes through Europe and settles in Western Europe here. And if I expand this out, you can see how this line comes over here into Western Europe. Part of it goes up to the British Isles. We talked about this lighter blue here, this I2B is my Marchen line. That's in northern Germany, and then eventually comes down into, here's Switzerland, comes down into Switzerland during the Roman Empire time. But your line would have been in Switzerland older than that. You can see, but all this diversity all over. And you could study all these in detail if you want to. Now I have this project that I've set up through the Lancaster Mennonite Historical Society, which is now called Mennonite Life. It's called Amish and Mennonite Immigrants to Pennsylvania. I have 845 members in this project as of this week. I set this up in 2010, and it's grown considerably since that time. And this includes DNA results, surname studies, these kinds of things. And we have a few Brubakers in here. I have this all categorized out. You can see here in the middle of this list are some of our Brubakers, and that Schlebach is there. That was closely related as well, that I talked about. That Carter family is in here as well. The Gemrichs haven't joined yet, trying to get them to join, but they would be in here as well. If they would join, they would be in here. You can see here, we go down to that Z36, which was that last top signature that I talked about. Thousands of people have that signature, thousands of people. Yeah, there's thousands of other signatures too. And you can see here, this is just one small piece of this page that has all these other families that are earlier related to these. And then if I would expand this out, there's 845 on this list. So it's pretty amazing trying to categorize all these families together. And that is the end. I'll take a little time for questions. I know, like an hour, or not quite an hour. When do we want to close? 1:30?
Northeast corner.
Yeah, take a couple minutes here for.
Yeah, a few questions.
About, say if you've got your intentions or not.
Mhm.
Is there?
Yes. Yeah, there definitely is, and for a few reasons. The question was, is there value to retake your test again if you've taken a test 10 years ago? The technology has improved dramatically in the last 10 years. When I gave the presentation 6 years ago, I knew at that point that Brubaker DNA was Celtic. I could do the comparisons and say that it's Celtic. I did not have all the specifics that I do now. I did not have all those families that they're related to that closely. And that comes from higher resolution tests that were available 10 years ago. And the other thing I didn't have 6 years ago when I gave the presentation was the archaeogenetics, the ancient DNA that we're getting from graves and such, and comparing that to living people. That also is a new dynamic that's going on.
Is there any place you recommend? Ancestry? You recommend one over India?
So they're all good. They all operate out of their own databases. So I've tested through all of them, and I would say, if you really want to get into this, you should test through all of them and do the comparisons through all of them. But family tree DNA is what this project is under. So if you would test through family tree DNA, you would get in this project if you want to. I mean, you opt in or you opt out, it doesn't matter. But if you want to be part of the project, you can join the project for sure. And then this also, what this project involves is the Y DNA. So for yourself, like you get a brother or a nephew with your maiden name or the surname of your interest, have a male test the Y DNA signature and have that signature established in the project. And then we can compare that signature to other people in the project.
Cousin or first cousin that's a Brubaker.
That has the surname that you're interested in. Yeah, yeah. Now I would say, like with Brubaker, I have 2 in the project. One of these is Ken. There are about 10 that have tested, because when I look at the matches, there are about 10 Brubakers that tested, and they all have the same signature. There are a few little variances that come up, just in the last few centuries. But what we should do is we should have one of those 10 test these SNPs. It's called the Y700 test, and it's a pretty expensive test. It's $450 or so. But that would show us. You see how this Schleibach here, he has this very specific SNP, and I'd be really curious if the Brubakers are that very same SNP or just one removed from it. So that list that I had way back here, I can get back to it. I'm kind of curious. See, I don't have a step here for the Brubakers because we haven't tested that high resolution yet, but I do for the Schleibachs. And I'd be curious as to whether the Brubakers actually fall underneath this SNP here, down here, or whether they're out here, or whether they're like out beyond this. But I know they're close in because of the other parts of the signature that match so closely. I can tell that they're close, but I don't know exactly where the Brubakers fit in this part of this tree. They're in here someplace. So a higher resolution test like that would show that. And there's so many resources now. When you test, they automatically look at your DNA and they'll show you how you're related to these ancient DNA samples from different parts of the world and such. So they got a lot of different things that they can show you now.
Darvin, we have somebody online on Zoom who's asking if the K branch of the family is in this anywhere.
So I don't know if the K branch has tested or not. Let's go back to our see the K branch here. From memory, I don't know if they tested or not. Here we go. The K branch, Allegheny Township, Blair County, PA. And possibly a descendant of Peter, the H1 branch. Yeah, I'm not aware of any that are tested in the H1, so I'm not aware of any that are tested in the K. But I would be really interested, because if the K branch is actually part of the H branch is that one that had the Maria Brubacher that bore that child before she was married. It probably is a different signature, right? Probably. It would be really interesting to kind of figure that out, kind of use the DNA to help better construct the genealogy. So that would be something that'd be interesting to do. Yes.
I had 2 questions. Is family tree the only DNA service that tests for Y and maternals?
The only main one. There are other ones that can test for Y, but family tree DNA has become the main one to use. Yeah. So
For the maternal.
for both Y and for the maternal. The 23andMe, you'll get a Y signature, but it won't be as high resolution as family tree DNA and 23andMe. And Ancestry now has focused just on the autosomal DNA, which is a little easier for what Ancestry is trying. Ancestry.com, Ancestry DNA, I'm talking about, they focus on the autosomal because their purpose is more just to connect people that are fifth generation or sixth generation or seventh generation. They're not that interested in the archaeogenetics or kind of going back through the history the way the Y can do. You know, so everybody has their focus. You know, I'm a subscriber to Ancestry.com, use it almost every day. I've tested through them and such, you know, so it's definitely a good company and such, but they have their focus a certain way. And like, just like 23andMe, 23andMe has its focus more towards the medical than for the two. You test through 23andMe, it's going to give you medical information for information only, but it will be more directed that way because that's what great grandfather. So
Do you recommend uploading your autosomal results to
So you can get information that way. It depends on how comfortable you are with sharing that information, right? I mean, there's always a discussion of how private DNA is, or should DNA be private, or shouldn't it be, and such. And the reality is that I talk about this sometimes in presentations. It's kind of a myth to think of your DNA as private, because what is DNA? It's a conglomeration of your ancestors in you, which means that your brothers and sisters have DNA really close to you, your cousins a little bit further removed, your second cousins a little further removed than that, third cousins a little further removed than that. Any of those people can test, and your DNA is in them too, right? So it's kind of a myth to think of your DNA as being private. But there are also concerns about, should anybody and everyone have your DNA? Do you want your health insurance providers to have your DNA? Your employer to have your DNA? Or the government to have your DNA? Do you want all of that? I mean, it's a legitimate concern, right? So use your own discretion as to how you're going to share it. I will say on the project, when your DNA is shared on the project, if you join the project, it's only this signature that's shared. I'll show you this again here. Notice there's no individual identity here. It shows an immigrant name that whoever the tester is has registered as, okay, this is from such and such immigrant. And location and such. Is that we don't know this Burkhardt here. We don't know who the tester is. The Kaufmans, we don't know who the testers are, right? They're not identified in the public view of the project, right? So there is that level of private discretion here in the project. But the purpose of the project is to showcase these surnames and be able to compare, just like I did in the presentation, be able to compare, well, how are these surnames related? Do two people that have different surnames, are they part of the same family? Carpenters, Zimmermans, things like that. Are they part of the same family? Or do these people that have the Millers? Lots of different DNA signatures, but there are two Miller immigrants. Are they the same family of Millers, or are they different families of Millers? The only way you're going to tell is doing something like this. So it's that kind of thing that we're looking at. Okay, I'll close with that.
Okay, wow, what a presentation. So I think we all know enough to understand that we really don't know that much yet. So thanks, Darvin, for all that information. That was just amazing. I was impressed, and I really didn't know that we built Stonehenge. We come from a long Brubakers. There's many artisans and contractors and skilled craftspeople in the Brubaker family. And who knew that that's where probably it started, right? So just another thank you for Darvin, man. There's a round of applause for Darvin. He did a great job. Really appreciate it. That's awesome. It's amazing. I'd also like to take a moment to thank everyone who helped out with this event, most of which are our board of directors. And actually, if you're on the board, if you could maybe just stand up and be recognized right now. Luann, who else is here? Marty. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for all that you all do. Okay, so next year, don't forget, I don't think we said it. I don't think we have an exact date, but it's always the first Saturday in August,
6, I think.
6th.
I think, yeah.
Okay.
10th, though. The first Saturday is, I think, the 10th.
Well, it's the first Saturday in August, whatever that date is. So make sure you save that date on your calendar. And again, more information will be sent out or put on our website. And if you sign up for the email, you'll get that information via email.
We want to get a group photo.
Oh, yes. So as soon as we dismiss right here, and everyone's certainly welcome to stay here. We have this space for a little while yet. Feel free to go back and visit the merchandise area. Elaine Rankin is our genealogist, and she is back there. And actually, I'll also recognize Elaine for the wonderful cookies that she made for us. So don't miss out on those cookies. They are awesome. Okay, so make sure you see Elaine before you leave. If you're interested in learning more about, what line, if you don't know the line of Brubaker that you're from, Elaine, I don't know about all the answers, but she has a lot of answers back there. So see Elaine, and she'll help you out there and get you to the right place of where you came from. So yeah, okay, sure, Darvin.
Just very briefly, 2 years ago, during COVID, slowed down, not traveling. I travel around with my work a lot, so I was slowed down. I was able to write a book about my grandparents, my grandfather, Lester Martin, and Hannah Fisher. There is a Brubaker connection because my grandfather's aunt, who just passed away, of that generation, the last in that family, Ida Ann Martin, who married Luke Brubaker, spelled with the Brubaker. That spelling is in my family. She's in the book, but the book goes back through my Martin line, back into Switzerland. Lots of information in Canton, Bern, Switzerland related to it, and also that part of my family was Old Order Mennonite, part of the Pike Church. If you're familiar with the Stauffer Pike Mennonites in Hinkletown, it's that group of horse and buggy Mennonites that my great aunt was part of and my great grandfather was part of. So I talk about that culture in the book a lot as well. If you're interested in, I have that book back there. It's for $35 hardcover, 650 pages. It's a pretty big book. It's about this thick, full of pictures. I tried to design that book that it had pictures on every open face. And then there's a second book back there. My wife's grandfather was in CPS, Civilian Public Service in Luray, Virginia during World War II. And he had diaries, and I have a book there about his diaries. If you're related to the Burkholder family, his name was Burkholder, John Burkholder, and his wife was Mildred Wanger. So the Burkholder and Wanger families. That book's back there for $20. So thank you for allowing me to sell those books here. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Darvin. Okay, so I don't think we have anything else on our program other than we'd like everyone to, I think right straight back there along that back wall is typically where we try to get a picture. So if you're able, we'll set up some chairs maybe in the front there so that we can, some can sit down in front and we can get everybody in the picture. So we like to have a picture of all of our reunions. They'll be posted on our website, so you can go there and see them. So everyone's dismissed, and if we could meet in the back for a picture, that would be great. Thank you, everyone.